Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled Evil Aunt Ruins Her Family's Lives and Gets Sent to the Hospital for it. So this happened about 7 to 8 years ago. My grandfather ran this electrical supply store that his father started and his still living mother owned. My great-grandmother also owned quite a bit of real estate and land around the town and was a slumlord landlord. She was the epitome of evil to quite a lot of people, and everyone hated her, including most of my family. To give you some traits of this woman, she threw a scalding hot pot of coffee on my uncle, snuck into my grandparents' house one night and beat my grandmother with a baseball bat, etc. Just an all-around spiteful human being, but you know, family. She was in her 90s and still had plenty of life in her. She took absolutely no meds, not even aspirin. This woman even survived a hit on her that resulted in 2.22 LR rounds being forever stuck in her brain. That was a traumatic experience, but a story for another time. Well, my grandfather managed the store, my uncle bid their supply jobs, and my mother handled all the rentals. I helped around pretty much everywhere and grew up in that business. Well, one day out of the blue, my estranged great-aunt, grandfather's sister, shows up to visit my great-grandmother. No big deal, she's been known to do this about every 4 to 5 years. Well, over the course of the following months, we had noticed a change in demeanor towards us. She started spending all her time with her daughter, who we'll call Gail. We didn't know it at the time, but Gail was having her rewrite her entire will. Over the following months, Gail had enlisted the help of some of our local PD using her mum's checkbook. Taps were placed on all our phones. My grandfather and uncle were both arrested under mysterious circumstances. My grandfather's mentally disabled brother died under mysterious circumstances in their home. Had power of attorney my mum held revoked and put in her name, and then bad my great-grandmother declared incompetent. It was a complete defamation that hit us all in a row. Then she up and fires everyone in the family because it's now all hers. Luckily at this time, we were able to destroy almost every physical copy of data we had, but not the computers. She changed all the locks and even had her corrupt cop buddies help play guard dog for her. To say we were furious would be an understatement. My family had poured their heart and souls into that business for decades, and it was all ripped out from under us in an instant. My family likes to take the high road, but me, not always. I pondered and waited for the right moment. It was about 2 months later when a very rough storm was rolling through one summer night. I grabbed my bag of supplies and hopped into my truck. It was about 1 a.m., and the town was dead. No one wanted to get out in the torrential downpour. I pulled up behind the building and killed the vehicle. Now I was pretty much raised in this building, and knew it inside and out. I also had helped install the security cameras, so I had that knowledge as well. I picked the machine shop door and snuck in. From this point on, I began to lace every possible surface with poison ivy. Keyboards, mice, phones, counters, doorknobs, toilet seat, toilet paper, just anything I knew she would touch. Interesting little fact about my family, almost everyone in my family is highly allergic to the crap, so much so that they have to go to the hospital for just getting near it. I lucked out on the genetic lottery and it doesn't affect me at all. After every surface had a nice, oily film to it, I proceeded to open up the business computers and wipe every financial record and every backup. I also decided to sabotage the computer's electrical supply so it looked like a power surge blew it. To my glee, I heard the next day that she was in the hospital and a lightning strike had fried their comps. She spent that entire week in the hospital and had to keep going back for months because they just couldn't get rid of the poison ivy. All invoices and accounts both for the electrical supply business and the hundreds of rentals were all lost. Literally all of the information had just disappeared. I wish I could say this story had some sort of happy conclusion, but unfortunately there isn't one. My family couldn't afford to keep the lawsuits up, and grew exhausted from the harassment, especially after my great-grandmother died. We lost, but I made her life hell for it. She was never able to truly salvage either business. She was a raging sociopath, and definitely not cut out for business. I've heard over the years that she was able to salvage the rentals somewhat, with a few hiccups. One tenant threw a brick at her car for threatening her, several people have shot up the business, bricks thrown through her windows, etc. I'm sure there's way more, but I don't keep up. The next one is titled, I got back at my homophobic father by pretending to have a boyfriend and bringing him over for Christmas dinner, causing him to freak out and lose himself in front of the whole family. Ever since I can remember, I have been completely and utterly under the thumb of my father. All of us have been, us being me, my younger brother, little sister and my mother. My father is a raging butthole. A male chauvinist, over-the-top macho type of guy. And I've always been the victim, growing up, of his dislike. Because I didn't really fit in with his image of the ideal son. I was, for lack of a better word, a bit of a girly boy growing up. I wanted nothing more than to dance and frolic around in dresses. When I was 4 or 5, my mother had this big box of dress-up clothes. She brought it down from the attic and I immediately picked out the prettiest, frilliest golden-colored dress I could find. I pranced around in it and declared myself a princess. And that I was now a girl. This went on for a few months, but strictly during the day when my father was away at work. I watched ballet videos with my mother, a soft-spoken and open-minded woman who worked part-time as a social worker in those days. I was happy. Careless. My father was, and is, an authoritarian figure. Had himself legally emancipated at an early age just so he could join the army ahead of time. After 3 years in the army, he left as a lower-level officer and started a career as a seaman. He was a captain when he and my mother met and had me. Later he left his naval career and became a traveling salesman. Think Don Draper, if Don Draper was a 6 feet 4 inches Western European man with curly graying hair and piercing blue eyes. I've always found him incredibly intimidating and I think my mother did too. Anyway, long story short, he came home early one day. He saw me in my dress and told me in an icy cold voice, "Go and take that off. After you take it off, go sit on the sofa." So, I took it off. Little hands trembling. Next, he summoned my mother into the room. Demanded to know what the hell she had been doing to his boy. I've never seen a person shrink so much so quickly. I myself was like a little tiny fly on the wall at this point, barely present. He took the box with clothes up to the attic. Put a lock on it and informed us that we were not to touch it until my wife gives me a daughter. It stayed there on the attic, untouched, until my sister was born 10 years later. My father took more of an interest in my upbringing after this point. He took me to see Navy ships, races, made me go on a martial art. He seemed determined to make a man out of me, and in some ways he succeeded. One thing he allowed me to do was keep my hair long. Knowing I was bullied at school for it and wanted at times to cut it off for that reason. He insisted I kept the long hair, faced the bullies and beat the crap out of them every time they called me a girl, to show them how much of a girl I was. I did just that. It toughened me up, in some way. But it also damaged me in other ways. By the time I went to college, I had grown into a pretty normal dude. I wasn't gay, I wasn't even a crossdresser, although deep down inside I still had those urges. I tried desperately to fit in and be what he wanted me to be, but I also grew more and more resentful. In college I made a lot of different friends. Including some guys I met in an acting class we both took. One of them was pretty much your typical, flaming and fabulous type of guy. He was as over-the-top gay as my father was over-the-top straight. I told him one night when we're drinking about my upbringing and my terrible father. And my friend, let's call him Paul, suggested I should get back at him. I asked him how. Basically, why not pretend like I was gay? But not just say it over the phone or something. Or even to my father's face in person. No, much better. I'd hint for weeks in advance about having met somebody and being in a relationship. I'd say it was a girl. I would ask if I could bring Paula over for dinner. At Christmas. When the whole family would be there. And I'd arrive at the house with Paul instead. So I did exactly that. I went to the house, at Christmas. Dressed to the nines. I told my father and mother that Paula was caught up, she's about to come. I'll just open the door. So I sat down with my family. Cousins. Uncles, aunts. My grandparents, just as conservative as my father. Waited a while. Heard the door and rushed to open it. Walked into the living room where everyone was gathered and introduced Paul. My boyfriend. I've never seen a room go so quiet. People literally gasped for air. My sister, brother and mother looked both scared and amused, but everyone else was in shock, my father seething, he just completely lost it. Right in front of everyone. veins bulging in his neck to the point where they looked like they were about to pop. He told me to leave. Ordered me, essentially. My grandparents urged him not to make a scene, but he made one. I just replied calmly how he should do it. Call the police and explain the situation to them. I knew he never would. He knew some of the officers well. It wasn't a call he would be willing to make, and it wasn't a situation he was willing to explain. I called his bluff and he just sank. Like he shrank before my eyes. My mother and grandmother had to calm him down. He walked out of the room, defeated. I just stood there, not believing my own eyes. I finally felt free. Like I didn't give a duck anymore. He had scared me for so many years, terrified me, and now I could see him for the caricature he really was. It felt amazing. Paul and I stayed the whole evening. He played his part perfectly. He eventually managed to charm some of my aunts and even my grandmother, who told me unironically how she was glad I found such a delightful man. And that he reminded her of her favorite TV character, Mr. Humphreys from Are You Being Served, such a doll. My father later came back to the room. Sat in a corner, sulking, refusing to meet my gaze. He drank too much whiskey. My mother kept talking to him in a hushed tone of voice, and he kept making a go away gesture with his hand. I stayed away from home for a while. I've already explained to everyone how it had been a prank. How I had to make a point and get back at my father for how he had treated me. Pretty much everyone sympathized. I didn't lose anyone in my family over what happened. But my father lost a lot of respect in people's eyes, I feel. He was always in control of things, he always directed the scene, but now he doesn't anymore. I do my own thing. My sister does her own thing. He cannot order people around anymore. And I feel like a fool for ever letting him. I can now wear whatever the hell I want to wear, enjoy whatever hobbies I want to enjoy, and nothing changes. He threatened to disinherit me that night. He threatened a lot of things, but in the end, something inside him just broke. All of my relationships since have been with women, and I have since married and had children of my own. My younger brother came out as gay eventually, but by that time my now aging father had mellowed down somewhat, and as he already has grandchildren and his legacy is thus secured, he didn't seem to mind much. It helps that my brother is a muscular gym rat and that they can bond over sports, more than my father and I ever did. But whenever the subject of sexuality comes up, my father is still incredibly awkward. I don't think it will ever change. But I feel my revenge has been pretty successful in the end. The next one is titled, The Misdealings of a Wife and a Husband's Revenge. Let me first start out by saying there are no saints in this story, but clearly, I have sided with one. Jack and Jill have been married for 5 or 6 years and close to the family. Jill has struggled with a methamphetamine addiction, but has had periods of being clean. They now have a sweet 4-year-old daughter. There is a lot of family support, but Jill has been distancing herself from family for the last year. Very much the sign of the meth user, but she is clever and has mostly everyone doubting reality, passes P tests, always has some alibi, etc. For the last 6 months, she finally got a job. A real job working on computers, supposedly. But Jack and the family have never seen a paycheck. Nor will she give the address of where she works. Jack's truck was broken into, let's say, 4 weeks ago. Jill went to JCPenney's in Jack's truck, shopped, came back to the truck and the door was broken into and Jack's gun was missing out of the lockbox. She called the cops and filed a report. I heard about this and immediately became suspicious of Jill. But, well, it's too early for me to say anything, because some family might be offended by my allegations. But I still tiptoe around the subject. Jack is also suspicious, but kind of under her spell and to some degree believes her story. 2 weeks ago, let's say, Jack's truck is broken into again, this time in another public parking lot. This now happens the day after Jack puts $2,000 of new tools in the locked tool chest. Someone broke into the truck, found the key to the tool chest and stole all the tools. Jill calls the police and files a report again. What? Jill has to tell the same story again. What a coincidence. Many rumblings amongst family now. Jill showing only digital pay stubs, always out and dumping daughter off at family's house to take care of, and 2 break-ins within just a couple weeks. Jack works very long stints and isn't home that often. Now suddenly, Jack sees a draft on his bank account for $450 by some other chick's name. Tracks this girl down, calls her up and grills her. Finds out Jill met her somewhere in town and has been asking her for rides. telling her stories of her abusive, controlling husband who won't leave her any money to buy groceries for her daughter. Mostly true, Jack has got a lock on the money, ensuring family money actually goes for food and utilities. But Jill is convincing. Jill's new girlfriend buys it and helps her by cashing a fraudulent check. Jack tells Jill's new girlfriend, who by this time has been contacted by police and is scared, that unless you help me and the cops, I will press charges. Jack now has quite a bit of ammo on Jill and calls her out. You're always in town at your so-called job, you're stealing money, you must be on drugs, etc. Jill, under the pressure, cracks a bit and says yes, she has a boyfriend in town, that's where she's at during the day, but won't cop to any meth use. Passes drug test. Jack finally says, you idiot. You watch, in 3 days, you're going to see your boyfriend in the paper. Amongst other things. Jack goes home, picks up daughter, drives out of town to my house and spends a few days. Wife and I entertain niece while Jack is on the phone. Jack's first day here finds real boyfriend's name, not the name Jill gave. Jack finds out boyfriend in on parole. Parole for methamphetamines. Jack also calls Jill's new girlfriend again. Finds out she knows more than she said the day prior. She knows Jill's boyfriend. Jack reminds her, if you don't tell the cops everything you know, I will press charges. Jack then calls parole officer on day 2 and says, hey officer, just wanted to say. My truck was broken into 4 weeks ago and my gun was stolen. My wife appears to be on meth and she copped to hanging out with this guy, Jerry, let's say. Parole officer, do you know for sure if was Jerry that broke into your truck? Jack, I can't be positive, but my truck was broken into again 2 weeks later and more stuff was stolen. Seem like too much of a coincidence. Also, my wife's new girlfriend also knows boyfriend and I can have her call you to tell her what she knows. By the way, here is boyfriend's new address. Jill's new girlfriend, still scared, calls parole officer, to help any way she can get out of charges herself. Says, yes, I know Jerry, and lately he's been carrying around a new pistol. Parole officer now has corroborated accounts of a parolee in possession of a firearm, something a parolee by law cannot have. Parole officer calls Jack on day 3 and says, well Jack, I went to the address. Your wife answered, then slammed the door. We had to kick to the door open. Boyfriend was found inside with meth on his person. Both boyfriend and your wife are now in custody. Your wife has been charged with obstruction and we found this pistol. Jack, was it a make, model, with synthetic stocks, and a stainless steel frame with serial number? Parole officer, yes, for all the above except that the serial numbers have been scratched off. Our heads were spinning. Jill and her boyfriend are sitting in jail. Boyfriend is a parolee with multiple new felony charges, to name a few: illegal substances, stolen firearm and defacing a firearm. Jill has since been released, but boyfriend, well, he's going to be there for a while. Jack's last words to us were, I told her, give me 3 days and you'd see his name in the paper. I'll end it with, I adore both Jack and Jill and hope they can work this out for their future and for their daughters. They're still young and like some of us, late bloomers. The last one is titled, Since You Got Me Demoted, You're Not Getting Promoted. This happened a good long while ago. I was in high school and got a job at one of the big box stores in the computer department. This store chain had an in-house technician department, which was always where I wanted to go. After busting my butt in sales for 2 years, putting up with rude customers, silly rules and all the other glorious trappings of retail job, I finally got a chance to be promoted to the technician department. It was not as glamorous as I thought it would be. I quickly found out that most of the repairs consisted of running the pre-packaged antivirus suite, updating Windows, and doing data backups prior to wiping computers clean and reinstalling them. I always liked tinkering with hardware more, but since 80% of customers had laptops and those repairs were deemed too complicated by corporate, we would just send the laptops out to get repaired by the third-party vendor. It was still better than sales by a long shot, and we had a great team working in the technician area, except for one dude, let's call him Mike. He always behaved like his crap smelled like roses. He was technically a lead technician, and even though that just meant he had a little more authority, he had access to a corporate account to arrange shipments of computers to and from our store. He was acting like he was the manager of the department. Nevertheless, our actual manager was a splendid dude that took care of us, and as such, Mike's douchery did not bother any of us that much. Fast forward a little and our awesome manager found a much better job. This opened up a spot for the manager, and since the whole store supervision was going through a shake-up, the general manager was fired for embezzlement and all the people he hired, 90% of managers, were under review. This led to everybody trying their hardest not to duck up, and the new GM decided that since our department was one of the best in the district, he would not try to hire an outsider, but will promote from within. Now Mike was working at this store for almost 10 years at that point, and a couple of people that started working with him as sales associates were by this point managers and assistant managers. One of them, Brittany, was an assistant manager in charge of customer services and checkout. One of the conditions for Mike's official promotion to the manager was to keep the #1 spot in the district performance-wise. One of the key metrics was the rejection rate from our third-party vendor. If we mistakenly sent them a software problem to fix, they would charge us extra. Mike started obsessing about the numbers, especially when it came to the rejection rate. He insisted that we would spend extra time to confirm issues, even when there were recalls from manufacturers for these items. I hated this bureaucracy since it meant that people needed to wait almost the maximum allowed time to get their computers back. So a few times I skipped the extra diagnostics when I knew for sure the problem was hardware. One day, Mike decided to do an audit on all outgoing machines and found out that I've sent 4 units skipping his extra checks. He told me that he will write me up for it, but when he tried, GM told him that he is not a manager yet, and I have shown to the GM that I followed the corporate procedure in diagnosing these units. I thought that was the end of this, but I was sorely mistaken. Mike hated that I showed OGM that Mike's procedure was inefficient and that he was denied power over me. About a month later, I got a call from Mike asking if I could come to the store on my day off because there was an issue with a customer. When I came in, I was greeted by Mike with a crap-eating grin, and he told me to wait in the back and not to work on any computers. After about an hour, Mike and Brittany come in and ask me to head to the front office. They started an official write-up process and claimed that I have made a mistake creating a backup of customers' data and have placed a DVD with no data on it into the box that was returned to the customer and then wiped his PC clean. I knew that it was crap, since I always copy the data to an external hard drive, run antivirus to make sure that nothing bad got copied, and then burn DVDs. Yet, when I asked to check the external hard drive, Mike said that due to my negligence I was not allowed back in the tech area. He went to check the hard drive and said there was nothing on it. At that point, I knew he was bullshitting, but him and Brittany were hell-bent on completing the write-up. I have asked for senior management to be present, and was shot down again. Turns out GM was on vacation. They completed the write-up and told me that due to the egregious error that cost the company tens of thousands of dollars, I was not allowed to work in the tech room and I would be relegated back to the sales floor. I told them to shove it and submitted my resignation on the spot. I later found out that a week later they gave the customer the data that was on the hard drive all this time. Mike simply erased the DVDs. I grabbed a DVD RW by mistake for that backup, and waited for the customer to come back and complain. I have also called the corporate HR line and told them what happened. They said that since I quit with a letter of resignation, they would not launch an investigation, but they have received and recorded my complaint. Through luck and the fact that I was a good hardware tech, I landed a job at a shop that did hardware repairs a week later and started in another week. Turns out this depot was the service center that covered the entire district, and they had the master contract with the big box chain where I worked. Since I have worked as the tech in that store, I was more than familiar with their labeling and ticketing system. For tracking purposes, the label included the store and technician number. After a couple of weeks, I gathered some goodwill at my new job and started trading the units with my colleagues to work on as many units from my old store as possible over the next 3 months. I made sure that every single unit sent in by Mike would come back with an extra charge. Also, it turned out that Mike, since he was in charge of shipping, would sometimes steal other technicians' tickets to boost his personal performance numbers to secure that manager's promotion. Well, that bit him in the butt hard. There was one week in particular when he sent in over 15 units out of 20 to get fixed, and 15 units came back with extra software charge. I have also kept detailed records that proved that Mike did not follow his own policy of extra checks. When the performance figures came out for the quarter, store crashed into 5th place from number 1. Mike missed out on his promotion and a big bonus that was promised to him. A good buddy of mine from the store got the manager position a few months after that, and I have explained to him how to reduce the number of software charges to almost 0. So he looked like a superstar. Mike was first relocated to lead technician, then he was either let go or he quit. I'm not sure. Last I heard he started his own mobile technician business that folded after a year. What I didn't know is that this whole incident with Mike ducking up led the GM to review everything Mike did, including my write-up and dismissal. As it turns out, they did not even register the write-up since I quit on the spot and buried it. The only way GM was able to find it is because of the HR complaint that was filed against both Mike and Brittany. GM was not pleased that they went behind his back to get rid of someone and fired Brittany. He was a very decent man who called me later that day and apologized and even offered me my old job back. I thanked him, but I was making more money at the new place and did not have to deal with customers, so I passed. Thanks for listening.